This is a story that I first heard from a great man named Matthew Kelly, and it's a pretend story, so don't get too worried about anything. I just want you to place yourself in this story, though, okay? Place yourself in this story and imagine it for yourself. We recently have had a little bit of a scare across the country with Ebola, so a situation like this is not so hard to imagine, but I want you to place yourself in this story. I want you to imagine that you're driving to work one day, and as you're driving to work, you hear on the radio that in a third world country far from here, 4,000 people have contracted a new strand of the flu, and they have passed away. 4,000 people are either sick and or dying or have already died. And there's no cure for this disease. They have not found any way to cure this disease, but it spreads rapidly, it spreads quickly. And once you get this disease, you could have a few months or a few years to live, but the most certain outcome to this disease is death. There's no other option, there's no cure, no doctors have been able to discover a cure. So you hear the news and you think, well, that's terrifying. And a few weeks later, you're driving to work, and this time it's not 4,000 people who have contracted the disease, but 400,000 people. And pretty soon, panic begins to set in all over the world, and countries even begin to close their borders. No coming in, no going out. If you're here in America, you're stuck here. If you were here in another country, you can't get back. We're closing the borders because this disease just spreads so quickly. So everyone kind of locks themselves away and begins to fear and worry about what would happen if this really did reach America. Until one day you're listening to the news and watching the news, and you hear the tragic and fateful news that there are 6 people in a New York hospital who have contracted the disease. And from there, it begins to spread through America and eventually even here into the Metroplex. And eventually, all of us know somebody who is infected or has already died of this disease. We all know somebody or are aware of somebody. And in fact, we all believe that we have this disease because it has spread so quickly and it takes so long to get the results back and find out whether you have this disease or not. It has spread all over the world. But one day there's a glimmer of hope and there's some light at the end of the tunnel. The doctors release a press release and they say, the good news is that we believe we have found a way to make a cure. The problem is we need somebody who doesn't have the disease. So we need everybody to rush to their local hospital, get tested, and then find out if we can find somebody who doesn't have the disease, then we can make the antidote and we can make a cure. So you pick up your family and you rush up to the hospital, and eventually you get in line and you go through and they draw from your blood and they do a test and they check you and they tell everybody, just go in the parking lot where we can rapidly check the results now. We just want everybody to wait in the parking lot until we figure out if somebody doesn't have the disease. So you go out with your family in the parking lot, you're waiting. All of a sudden, after hours and hours, the doors of the hospital burst open. A doctor comes out and he has a megaphone and he says, I have good news. We have found somebody who doesn't have the disease, and the crowd goes wild. They applaud and clap and they laugh and they scream and they're so happy to hear this. And he says, a name. We need so-and-so to come forward, but you can't hear the name over everybody talking around you. What did he say? I didn't hear. What did he say? He says it again. Still, the second time you don't hear. He says it a third time. You still don't hear. But just at that moment is when you feel a tug at your jacket. And you look down and your only son says to you, Daddy, they called my name. At this moment, you pick him up and you rush into the hospital. You say, Doctor, this is the person that you called. This is my son. And he says, great, this is great. We're going to take him back and begin to prep him. And so we'll just need to take you in the other room and get you to sign some forms. So you say, okay, doctor, you and your spouse, you go into the room and the doctor says, we just need you to sign a few forms. But before you do, I need to tell you something. You say, what, doctor? What do you need to tell me? And the doctor says, we're going to use your son's blood to make a cure for everyone else. And I'm so sorry to tell you this, but we didn't expect it to be a child. And we've checked, and he's the only person in the whole world who hasn't been infected with this disease. And you say, Doctor, what does that mean? You didn't expect it to be a child. And he says, well, I don't know how to tell you this, but the truth is, We don't just need some of his blood, we need all of it. Doctor, what are you saying? How could I give my son away to death to save people who I don't even know? How could I do this? The doctor says to you in a very serious tone, remember that it's to save the whole world. And there will be no one if you don't make this sacrifice. Could you do it? Could you give up your only son? Knowing that everyone else would perish, but you would never get your son back? Could you do it? And if you did it, let's say you gave your son and you said, okay, I'm going to do it. Can you imagine the moment of walking back into that hospital room to say your last goodbyes to your son? He would say, Daddy, Mommy, what's going on? Where are you going? What are they going to do to me? Why have you forsaken me? Let's say you did make that sacrifice and you gave your son, and people all over the world said, you know what, we're going to create a memorial service for him. Not just to mourn his death, but also to celebrate the fact that we all have life because of the sacrifice that he made. So we're going to have a memorial service, but as a parent, how would you feel if eventually people started saying, you know what, I've got better things to do than to go to that? You know those things that we do at the memorial service that remind us of this child? They just don't really carry that much weight with me anymore. As a father, you would say, do you not remember that my son willingly gave his life for you? That you wouldn't even be here if it weren't for his sacrifice? You see, Paul later said that every time we do this act of the Eucharist, we proclaim the Lord's death and resurrection until the day he returns. And the truth is that every one of us was infected with a disease. And the disease was sin. And the most certain and absolute outcome was death. But there was a Father who gave his Son simply so you could have life.